Oh, hi. Just sitting out here in my backyard, soaking up a nice Sunday night. Had some thoughts banging around in the back of my head today, so I thought I'd share them. So, if you'll note the title of this video is titled Consistency. Or maybe it should be titled The Cost of Consistency. I'm not sure. You'll see it by the time I post it. So, having been on the planet now for 50 years, I have had the luxury of seeing many cycles in business and relationships and people, whole nine yards. And one of the things that I have noticed as being the difference between successful businesses or ventures or ideas and not successful businesses, ventures, and ideas is consistency. So here's what I mean by that. So let's take a basic example like the car business, the car business globally in general, and how it's been in my life. Now, I was born in the 70s, and in the 70s, that was sort of a big downturn in the abilities of cars because at the time, just at the end of the 60s, we had all the muscle cars and rah rah yay team, lots of exhaust, lots of ostentatious stuff. And in the beginning of the 70s, emission requirements came in, which disallowed the automakers' ability to be consistent, meaning that they all of a sudden had to stifle the cars, and they're in a situation where it basically severely restricted horsepower ratings, and as a result, that whole period in automotive circles is called the malaise period. And if you look at the styling in the cars of the 70s, there are some standouts, but it's not super great. So the 60s is lauded as being like Shangri-La because cars had style, like 67 Mustangs and 66 Corvettes and stuff like that. That was the heyday of that period. And so through no fault of their own, the car companies were forced to become inconsistent. And in the 70s, that's actually what allowed the Asian automakers, namely the Japanese, Honda, Toyota, Mazda to a small degree, were allowed to get in because they saw what was going on, and they were able to bring vehicles to market which capitalized on the new rules, which the old guys were not able to deal with. And as a result, you had they got a foothold in the market with the Civic was new then, and I think the Accord came in, and some of the Toyota products. Bottom line is that they were able to get a foothold because they were able to make cars that could live inside those new parameters that were performed well and had good quality, et cetera, et cetera, and that was they embraced that consistency. But then we got into the 80s and 90s, and the North American automakers figured out a lot of stuff, and they had a resurgence, not only in styling and things like that, but they had a resurgence in power levels. The Fox body Mustang came out, which everybody wanted one when I was a kid because it was powerful and in your face, and so you saw it swing again. And now the Japanese automakers, they didn't go away. They also were able to move, and so almost everybody became consistent. It's pretty much widely accepted among mechanics that all of the vehicles made pretty much from like the mid 80s up till like the early 2000s, most of them are pretty reliable. I mean, there are some exceptions, but most of them are pretty reliable if they have regular maintenance and things like that. And so they had a level of consistency, which made it an easy. You could buy pretty much any car and get good service out of it. And then we arrived in at the end of the financial crisis in 2009. It's interesting how that happens. And all of a sudden, we had to make more money. And so that we started seeing new levels of inconsistency, meaning you can talk to a lot of car guys, things like that, and they, had the dawn of electronics, more egregious electronics, more complexity in engines, more parts that are prone to failure, till the point we are at now, where reliability in cars, even Toyota, in many cases, has fallen off a cliff. And there's quite a crisis going on right now, because essentially it's plagued all of the car makers, including even the electric car makers. Everyone has become inconsistent. And consistency is what any consumer needs in a product in order to fully embrace it and want to use it. So anyway, so that's just a quick synopsis of what I'm talking about here as being the difference between consistency and inconsistency. Because the other side of this is that after the financial crisis in 2009, there were some automakers that, I'll give you a prime example, would be Mazda. Mazda has a very high reliability. They were able to continue to be consistent. And Toyota to some degree as well. They've had some problems lately this year, but still pretty good. But essentially, across the board, a lot of the manufacturers just overcomplexified, especially a lot of the German manufacturers, overcomplexified their vehicles and essentially lost customers, and it affected their business. And the cost of it is that, anytime, if someone had a time machine, like, I don't know if you may or may not be familiar, but Hyundai and Kia have had quite a lot of problems in the last little bit because, or in the last few years, because they have a particular engine that is failing just because there wasn't enough engineering put into it, and they've got class action lawsuits, major headaches. I mean, heck, could cost the company everything. But the point is that if they had a time machine and could go back to the drawing board when they were engineering that car, I've got money that says the president of Hyundai would give his left nut to do that. Maybe both nuts. So anyway, that's consistency. You see it in media. So again, I'm a man of my age. One of the things we hold dear is the Star Wars franchise. And the Star Wars franchise is beloved to many, many men my age. I was 7 years old waiting to see Star Wars, lining up. We went and saw it twice. Then I had to wait 3 years to see Empire Strikes Back. 3 years, because there was no CGI. Then I had to wait 3 more years until Luke could kick Vader's ass in Return of the Jedi. And it was a 10-year investment, and it was so consistent. They were telling a story that was wonderful and, had a special place in my heart. At the end of Return of the Jedi, I couldn't believe it was over because I had a relationship with them. Because they were very, very consistent. Fast forward a decade or more later, we got word that Lucasfilm, there was some money changing hands, thinking they were going to make some new movies. And if you talk to a lot of the guys who saw the new movies, they're actually prequels, movies which covered the story before the Star Wars movie, one that we saw in the 70s. And they were okay. They weren't over the top. I'm going to say that of the 3 new ones that were made, the third one was probably the best, as it leads right into there's a Phantom Menace. I'll put them in the description. The point is that look it up. They were accepted, but people weren't crazy about it. And the reason we weren't crazy about it is that they had lost some consistency. Now, even further to that, Lucasfilm then sold the rights to Star Wars to Disney. And if you've heard anything in recent history about Disney's relationship with the Star Wars franchise, Essentially, anyone who's familiar with the original movies and the original feeling that those movies created, essentially we are all feeling betrayed. We are feeling betrayed because the consistency is gone. The promises that were made by the Star Wars franchise, you know, virtue, values, working for a goal, earning your keep, all that kind of stuff, quite frankly, in the last few movies have been vaporized by the woke agenda. It's the agenda where, we're going to overemphasize groups which are not really that largely present in society. It's not that they're not important, but when you tip the scale so far in one direction where it seems like everything is revolves around them, you basically disrespect everyone who loves the production and the consistency that was thereof. And as a result, the latest efforts, like they're basically bankrupting Disney because they've lost consistency. Now, what's even more hilarious is that in the light of them losing this consistency, there is no humility. There is simply, oh, you should like it. You should just like it. That's the way it is. Even though we've decided to change everything, you should like it. Well, I don't know about you, but anyone who puts me in a headlock and tells me, when I was a kid, I didn't like eating my peas, whether they were forced in my mouth or I was bribed, I didn't enjoy it. Now, as an adult, of course, I like peas, but that's another story altogether. But the point is that the lack of vision, maybe a level of narcissism, I can't quite tell you what it is, but their the lack of consistency married with a lack of humility is causing Disney to be crucified in one of the most important ways possible. Not only financial, but in the perception of the public. In the perception of the public, Disney is now a laughingstock. And pretty much anything that's created, anyone with a reasonable amount of sense says no thank you. So, those are a couple of stories of how consistency is very important. And make no mistake, just like we talked about with the car makers, if Disney had, I don't know, maybe they made a couple of maybe made one bad movie, maybe two. But when they went to make a third, maybe if they had consulted with the people that were originally hardcore fans, maybe the original authors, maybe George Lucas himself, it's very possible they could have had a come to Jesus moment where they're like, oh, we have been doing it wrong. We've been changing what this thing was, even though when we bought it, the reason Lucas sold it was under the understanding they were going to grow it and make it even more wonderful than it had ever been with the power and reach of Disney. But whatever agenda was there, underlying and unspoken, it has brought that organization to its knees. And had they done what I just suggested about consulting and making, you saw a glimpse of that with the Boba Fett series, not Boba Fett. It's the one bounty hunter dude. I forget the name of it, but again, if you're a Star Wars guy, you know what I mean. There was a series that came out for a bit with Baby Yoda, and it was the first season. Everyone was like, "Oh, great, it's back!" And then they promptly ripped it away in the second season and then the following movies. So there it is. And can you imagine if there's a time machine that we'd be sitting right now where they hadn't done that? Not only would they have so much more money, they'd have people lining up to go to the theaters. You'd have people wanting to give them money hand or fist. Their valuations of the company might be double. And all they had to do was be consistent. So, a personal story for myself. The people involved I don't even think they're on Facebook, and this goes back a long way in the past. So I'm sure they're not even pay attention. And I'll leave the names out for posterity. When I was a younger man, because I'm still a young man, when I was a younger man, I went into business with a fellow. He was running a small graphics business, and I had come along and I had seen that he was struggling a little bit, but they were creating good work. And at the time, it was before there was a lot of digital media out there. And I saw an opportunity to reinvent the business by approaching other businesses that had very lackluster media, like not good graphics and not good placements, things like that, and create, higher brow advertising. And, I presented my ideas to this fellow, and we worked together, and we grew the business to be rather substantial. And I, being the trusting soul that I am, I had more or less come to him and said, "Hey, I want half of what we create, et cetera, et cetera." And it was done in a handshake. And this went on for a couple of years. The business got fairly substantial, and inside that time frame, and I was very consistent with my customers. We created some success for people, and they told two friends, and they told two friends, and so on and so on. And the business got bigger and bigger, and it eventually came to the point where I said to the fellow, "Hey, I think we should just formalize our arrangement here, because, the stakes are getting fairly high." And in that moment, he had aligned himself with a woman who, had helped him leave his wife in a less than honorable way, and just kind of messy. And push came to shove that the value of what I was doing was no longer appreciated, and I was told I was no more than just an employee. Well, and that was a quick removal of consistency. And with that removal of consistency, I was left with one of two things. I could have either become a wage slave, accepting my fate and just moving forward. But if you know anything about me and my personality, I simply will not take any garbage from anyone if they're not going to be consistent. I require everyone to show up the same as they do on day 1 as they do on day 5,000. Consistent, 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 because that's who I am, because that is the recipe for success. And as a result, I ended up leaving the business in actually quite a comical way. You could message me sometime. We could sit around a campfire and talk more about it. But essentially, most of the customers, when they heard that I'd left, they left that business. They actually ended up dealing with me. That's another story altogether. And now to this day, those people are the business changed hands. Those people are not involved in it anymore. And near as I can tell, they live just above the poverty line. And which is fine. Well, let me rephrase that. The one fellow did have some family money, so he could always rest upon daddy's efforts, but he would no longer be able to look himself in the mirror because he chose to be inconsistent. And so now, the reason I decided to bring this is that I have observed in the world, differing levels of dissatisfaction. I told you about the car business, but I've seen it in some of my personal acquaintances, some of my people at church, things like this. One of the common threads I have seen in regard to dissatisfaction is a loss of consistency. I have friends who are in loveless relationships, and there's always two sides to every story, but the commonality that I get from those talking to either party is that there has been a removal of consistency. And much like I told you in regard to the car story or the Star Wars story, or even my personal story, if consistency had been maintained, well, for starters, that business that I was in would either be much bigger and much more robust, and everyone would be a good deal wealthier, or I would have sold it and there still would have been money. And all that was required, make no mistake, the inconsistency was simply changing the terms of a very basic agreement we had made. We made a very basic, honorable agreement. And that was changed for reasons Oh, I guess anything like that's changed for reasons of selfishness or control. Is it control? No idea. At this point, I don't really give a damn. It's that's why it was done. And in relationships, whether it be romantic, whether it be business wise, if you have parties who decide to change the terms of the deal, what is the reason? Is it control? Is it fear? Oh, God only knows. But the end result is I have two friends, two camps of friends. I have some friends who are celebrating anniversaries now, and they've been married for a long time, and they're very happy people. And the common thread of that happiness is that they have chosen to remain consistent with each other throughout. And that again, I'm going to stress here, with each other. Consistency is not something that can be carried by one person. It is, or one half of an equation. It is something which must be embraced by the whole organization. Whether it is your life partner, even your relationship with your children. If your children choose to become inconsistent, you can't have a decent relationship with them, and maybe it has to change for a period of time or longer. Look at the story of the prodigal son. You have the son who one son decided to be consistent, work and do his thing and be very, very genuine. And the other son decided to go off and do his own thing because he knew best. And in the end, of course, his life was blown to shit. And the other son had stability. And of course, he had a little bit of misunderstanding if you read the story. But in the final analysis, if one could have had an opportunity with a healthy mindset to do things over, I imagine that things would go different. And so look at where you are right now and say to yourself, gee, here I am. Start with, am I happy or am I sad? If you're happy, great. Continue to be consistent. Clearly, that's what you're being. You're being consistent with your work life, your interpersonal relationships, your how you treat yourself, like because even being consistent with what you eat, how you think, the people you hang out with, how they make you feel, being consistent in all those areas, pursuing a healthy thing, is the path to edification. But remember, whatever you practice, you get good at. So if you have been consistent with thinking poor thoughts, hanging out with shitty people, indulging in behaviors which are not, if Christ was in the room, you'd be like, maybe I shouldn't do that. Or maybe just dealing with things in a way that there will be there'll be no humility. There will simply be, you've decided, much like the case of my ex-business partner or Disney or even the automakers, the bean counters, the automakers, you've decided you know best. And it has not worked out. I mean, look at the bedlam that's going on now with electric cars. Politicians and automakers, they thought they knew best. And now they can't even sell these pieces of shit that is sitting on the lots. They'll probably end up going to the crusher. This happened, 30 years ago. There was an electric car brouhaha that caused all of them to be destroyed. And the same thing's happening again. And, it's nothing really to lament about. It's more or less comical. When you see someone who's indulging, someone or a business or an organization that is clearly dropping the ball or choosing to be inconsistent, sometimes it is fun just to get the popcorn and watch things burn. And that's essentially what's going to happen with the electric car business. You'll be able to buy an electric car for nickels on the dollar if you care to risk that. But you have an opportunity. And again, all you have to do is do a little visualization experiment and say, gee, if I had been consistent, look at this wonderful outcome I would be enjoying right now. Or, gee, everything's shit, and could it be that I chose to be inconsistent and to change the rules? And further to that, once you look at these two possibilities, because these two, these are concepts, right? You then say to yourself, do I like being here? Would I like to be here? Do I like being here? Would I like to be here? And if the answer, and if you like being here, you can just stay here, because being inconsistent and a loser, it's easy. It's the easiest thing to do. And there's some people who wallow in being losers. They like complaining. It's their favorite thing to do. When, woe is me. Maybe they get something out of it. I have no idea. But, for your sake, your children's sake, your family's sake, your future's sake, if you go look at this and you go, oh yeah, that would be amazing, an amazing place to be at. And if you are here, you can. I'm going to tell you right now, you know exactly how to get from here to here. And it is simply consistency.